and then we'll get into as much specifics as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Explain to us what is meant by the term plant-based. A lot of people are going into the supermarkets today,
Mm-hmm.
and because of a change in diet and our lifestyle, they've strayed away from eating meats, and they've
Mm-hmm.
either become vegan or vegetarian, and as a result now they're pulling towards a plant-based diet where they're going inside the supermarkets and they're looking for packaging that says plant-based. I want you to explain to us the difference between the general idea of having a plant-based diet and what plant-based means when we're looking at packaging in the supermarket.
Perfect. Perfect question. I would go even further and say I would like to say more like soil based.
All right.
Why am I saying that? Because we can find plants in the grocery store that particularly may have not grown from the soil. So
Mm-hmm.
now we got to get into the details of that. When I say soil based, or let's use for lack of a better term, plant based, it is anything that is grown from the soil. So you got beans that's grown from the soil. You have potatoes that's grown from the soil. You have leaves, spinach, collards, kale. These are grown from the soil. You got herbs that's grown from the soil.
Okay.
So particularly if I had to tell you how to identify plant-based, it would simply be anything from the soil. But I would go even further and say this. Get away from the grocery stores and look for your farmers, because you should know who's touching your food. You should know who's
Mm.
doing your food. You should know what they're doing to your food,
Mm.
how long it's been on the shelf, because there's something called the Label Law Act where they can actually change the label on that food, and it'd be a year later. I'll give you an example. I used to work for this trunking company, right? And we was delivering chicken one time, and I was getting it off the truck, and the owner said, "Man, this chicken been dead for a year." So in my mind, I'm like, "Oh man, okay, I'll take it back for you. You know, that's messed up." He said, "No, it's all good. I'm gonna sell this in 3 days."
Mm.
I said, "What?"
Mm.
He said, "Yeah, I'm gonna sell that. Yeah, we do this all the time." So now something that's been dead, and if you know anything about blood, if you know anything, especially if you're reading the Torah,
Come on.
understand how blood after 3 days becomes toxic.
Mm.
Understand that once that toxicity gets into that blood, especially depending on how the animal is killed, that you literally become what you eat. So when you're dealing with something like cataracts or leaky gut, or you're dealing with something full of parasites, you're not realizing the damage that happened to that food. Even when it comes to plants, there's a specific way you should even harvest that plant, because if you pick it too early, it could become a toxic to you. So now we have to
Mm.
get to the science of even plantology. So most people eat bell peppers green, not knowing that the more ripened it becomes and it changes color, that's when it's most high in nutrients.
Okay.
So I would say when it comes to picking out plant-based foods, your best source to go to is your local farmers, and there's plenty of them.
Okay. I appreciate that. Now, again, I wanna be very specific with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I go into, like, let's say, a Costco, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at some of the labels in the freezer aisle, and it'll say plant based. I want you to explain to us what is plant based in terms of the label packaging that people are encountering in the supermarket, because many people are starting to slowly awake to the idea that that term plant based is a loosely defined term
Yes.
in the retail space and may not necessarily mean what you previously described. So
Got
explain for us what is plant based in a supermarket setting.
I would say in a plant-based in a supermarket setting is, I'll give an example. If you have, let's say, orange juice, if we give an example, the
Mhm.
ingredients should just say orange.
Come on.
So when you look at, let's say, a bean burger, it should not say a bean, this bean and that bean, and then this long word that you can't even say out loud, that you will have
Mm.
people to understand. So to answer directly, the question is plant-based is simply when it's organically what it actually says. If it's a bean burger, it should just be beans. If it's
Okay.
orange juice, it should just say orange. That
Okay.
makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And with that, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts on plant-based supermarket retail items that are recreating things in the meat world? For instance, now they got plant-based oxtail. They did have plant-based chicken. They got plant-based hamburgers. They have plant-based lasagna. Talk to us a bit about what those may entail and describe for us the dangers, if any at all, to be understood about some of these things.
Well, I think this goes back to understanding eating, right? It starts with a consciousness. That was the first thing the creator gave us was consciousness. And so when you look at the consciousness about behind eating plant-based meat, let's call it what it is, plant-based flesh. The idea that you want to eat anything that's relevant to flesh tells you that you're not really ready to go plant-based
Mm-hmm.
because you still want to have the sensation of feeling like you're eating that meat. Where we said it, in slavery, they said take the mind, but keep the body. Well, we say cleanse the mind and the body will follow. So you have to first cleanse your mind of actually looking at plants for what they is and seeing the benefit of it versus trying to code it or put a blanket over it and say a plant-based oxtail. So to your question, the dangers of plant-based anything referred to meat is that most of those are chemical based. Most
Mm.
of them are chemical based. And I'll be the first one to tell you when I first went plant based, right? Most people go to what they call impossible burgers or what's the other one? Beyond Meat.
Yeah.
And that's the transition. And so when I transition to that, I'm thinking I'm doing something. My Shabbat meal's coming. I'm maybe eating maybe one or two of them. I'm feeling good. I'm on a plant-based diet. I'm feeling like I'm on a journey. And this was after I did a 30-day all fruit cleanse. And so then I realized that when I started to defecate, it still stink. And if you know anything about people who transition to plant-based, you don't really smell. You don't have those toxic smells in your armpits or even when you're urinating or defecating. It doesn't smell like anything if you purely cleanse it. You
Mm.
only start to tell when you start adding things that's full of chemicals or it's full of toxins. So I
Mm.
noticed that I started to have a smell when I defecated. And so I'm like, well, I'm eating predominantly fruits all day. I'm eating raw salads. I'm juicing. The only time I'm really eating something, I guess, would be not necessarily plant-based all the way would be these Beyond Meat burgers. So then I started to do my research on it. And what I found out is that Beyond Meat burgers are worse than chicken.
Oh man, can you say that again? Woo!
I found out that Beyond Meat is worse than chicken and is actually causing a high rate of cancer in the so-called vegan community.
So if I want to make sure I'm capturing what you're saying accurately, there are studies, I'm assuming based on what you're saying, and you can clarify. There are studies, right? I'm guessing we can possibly look inside science and medical journals that are now starting to say that impossible burgers are linked to cancer. Is that what you're
Absolutely.
saying?
If you go to the National Institute of Health, if you go to WHO, if you go to Oxford University documents, if you go to University of Alabama documents, they've actually done studies because it's been a high rise of vegans who are having cancer now, stomach cancer specifically.
Mm.
So when I looked at it and I started to even put on weight eating it, I'm like, what is going on? I'm not eating no meat. I'm not eating no dairy. What's going on? And
Right.
that's what it was. It was the so-called plant-based burgers. And so
Mm.
when you look at the, and this is why we have to study. I'm big on studying ingredients. We should take pride in knowing what they're doing to our food.
Right.
So when you look at these ingredients and you actually start to look up, I mean, you take the time, and my family, I will take the time in the store. We will be there for 3 hours before I leave with the food. When you actually look up each ingredients, you talking about rat poison. You still talking about some like Impossible Burgers still use cases of pig.
Mm.
And so they may not necessarily be the meat itself, but they'll use different parts of it, like maybe the bone marrow
Right.
of pigs to use as
Right.
medicines on that. And that's what they don't tell you because they have a law. They don't have to tell you everything All they have to tell you is the main ingredients.
That's
So,
very interesting because those are considered byproducts, right?
yeah.
And from what you're saying, those don't necessarily have to be included in the label ingredients because of various laws that are protecting this. So here you are buying an impossible burger, a burger that says Beyond Meat, and
Hmm.
it's filled with carcinogens. It
Yes.
might even be filled with, as you said, pork casing.
Hmm.
So you're a Muslim. There might be a Muslim out there listening, right?
Yeah.
You're a Jew, you're a Hebrew, you're a law-abiding Christian, and you're removing yourself from pork and pork byproducts, and you're even removing yourself from meat. But you're now getting into this Beyond Meat, this Beyond Burger, this Impossible Burger, and it might have more pork than the pork you've been eating. This
Yes.
is something else, brother. And I
Yes.
gotta tell you, man, it's an epidemic because you have to think about it. Where are people consuming these things the most? It's where people socialize the most. So
Hmm.
now you can go to the movie theaters and
Yes.
there's a whole vegan option
Yes.
and it says Impossible Burger,
Hmm.
right? You go to other fast food stores and they ready for you, Impossible Burger. And you're saying, great, there's a vegan option here. Honey, I'm good, not realizing that the chemicals involved in the processing of this impossible burger can
Yes.
do as much harm as the meat you stop eating, if
Yeah.
not worse in some cases.